We're back in the workshop, sports fans, and you know what that means. Now, if you came here to see priceless retro rarities, there's plenty more of that on this channel, and there's more to come. The theme for today is the cheap bike challenge, specifically where to find them and what to look for. Now, I picked up this Giant for 25 quid on Facebook, and spoiler alert, it is a bargain. It's worth every penny and a hell of a lot more. And I thought this would be the perfect opportunity to share some pro tips on exactly how to do the cheap bike challenge. Now, the first pro tip is actually a tip I tend to ignore, and that is it clean? Now, the vendor of this bike did me the courtesy of cleaning it, which is to his credit, but some of the best bargains I've ever picked up have been absolutely filthy, and that doesn't mean there's not a gem underneath. I've recently become quite a fan of Facebook Marketplace because for every cynical seller with an inflated expectation, you can find just as many honest vendors, just like this one, who just want the convenience of having it taken off their hands in exchange for a very fair price. You can also find more than a few people who just simply don't know or care about bikes and who think that if it's got 2 flat tyres and a rusty chain, then it's worthless, and that's where some real bargains are to be found. Now, actually, this passed the ABC check, which is the next test. Now, C doesn't stand for Claude, although he also approves of this bike. C, in fact, stands for chain, which we'll come to in a minute. But A is for air. Do the tyres hold air? The answer is yes. In the case of this bike, I pumped them up, and for 24 hours, they've stayed up. So that's the first check. B, of course, is brakes, which is just a simple visual and mechanical check to see if the brakes operate, which these ones do. And thirdly is C, is chain. Does the chain spin freely? We haven't even got as far as do the gears index yet, but that's easy enough. And the answer again is yes. Now, there's plenty of surface rust on this bike, probably a reason why it went as cheaply as 25 quid. But none of that bothers me. That can very easily be treated, and I'm going to show you how. But first, my next pro tip, which is all about sussing out whether the bike is scruffy because it's had a hard life in storage or whether it's scruffy because it's done a lot of mileage. Now, there's a few telltale signs why this one is the former, not the latter. First of all, there's relatively little chain slap or chain rash on the chainstay, which means that it hasn't been ridden particularly hard off-road. There's 1 or 2 scuffs. I mean, it has been ridden, but things like the tyres, these are a matching pair of tyres, and as you can see, barely anywhere. A quick jet off and they're good as new. Likewise, brake blocks and rims, braking surfaces. You can tell just by touch and feel, as well as visually, that this thing, the brakes haven't been used, and again, matching sets of clearly factory original brake blocks, front and rear. Other little signs are these rather flimsy, plasticky reflectors that are on the wheels and on the front and back of the bike are all still present. They would have smashed off years ago if the thing had actually been ridden hard, but they're all still here. And by the way, this bike is a good 20 years old. Oh, also, you can see if you look really closely that the end caps are all still present on the cables. Another surefire sign that it's not really had that rough a life. So I'm saying it's a safe bet that any wear and tear on this bike is surface only. Clearly it's had things like boxes and shelves fall on it in the garage. It's got a few scuffs, but they're more likely from a rough life in storage. And also, you know, there's surface rust as we've seen, but that's just from probably a night or 2 outdoors. It's nothing that can't be cleaned up. But underneath, this bike, I would say, is good as new. It's time to inspect what this bike has and what it needs. Couple of observations. First of all, I specifically wanted one with a step-through frame. This is important because it's another charity donation. This time it's going to our local school street volunteers, and because they're lots of different people of different shapes and sizes, this was important. The second observation is generally very good quality, certainly a cut above some of the things you see on a cheap bike challenge. Double-butted chromoly frame, Rigida alloy rims with Michelin Wild Gripper tyres. Interestingly, a full SRAM group set, no Shimano on this bike, including the dreaded, some might say, grip shifts. Yeah, they're not pretty, and yeah, they're a bit imprecise, but they do work, so we're going to keep them. We'll sort out all the rusty bits. Other interesting things of note, a suspension seat post. Not the USE Alien that we all craved as kids in the 90s, but something that does still work. One thing that delights me about this find is that apart from just a few tweaks with this barrel adjuster, I haven't really had to do much to adjust the gears. They're pretty much still at factory settings, and as you can see, even with these rather nasty plastic grip shifts, they still index perfectly. The list of clues goes on. These little rubber gaiters on the V-brake cables are still present. On a bike that's had a hard life, these would have denatured and fallen off by now. So yet again, more evidence that the bike's been looked after or had an easy life. Also, sadly, still present is the remnants of this nasty plastic dork disc, which spins when freewheeling, and as you can see, rubs against the back of the cassette. So that's got to go. It makes an annoying noise and shouldn't be there in the first place. Bon débarras. Here's my next tip. If you're part of a cartel of capricious multimillionaire playboy gentleman collectors, then of course money's no object. But if you're building your cheap bike challenge to a budget, then you need to factor in this lot. Obviously you're going to need a UCI spec workshop. Actually not true. You can do what I'm doing today with some very cheap tools. But you're also going to need the products. The degreaser, the scrubbing brushes, the chain cleaner. WD-40 is magic for just scrubbing away at rusty bits. GT85 is a nice lightweight lube. Then a slightly heavier, like a wet weather lube for restoring the chain. This anti-corrosion spray is great for rusty bolt heads to stop them coming back. T-cut, you're going to see me restoring the paintwork, and then a top wax to bring it up to a shine. That's the bare minimum. There's also things like Auto Sol if you really want to go to town on cranks and chrome bits, which I'm going to do. All of which does cost a few quid, but obviously if you happen to have it already, then you can keep the budget right down. Another easy tip, if the brakes have lost some of their snap over the years, and these definitely have, they've gone a bit stiff, the magic of these slotted cable stops is you can pop out the housing and just give the inner cables a little wipe over with a lightly lubricated rag. Makes a hell of a difference. Snap, snap, snap. It's very rare to get a used bike whose wheels are spinning perfectly straight and true, and indeed this one wasn't, but it's certainly not bad. Did it require taking out and putting in a professional wheel jig? Probably not, but as the philosopher once said, anything less than the best is a felony. Now for these rusty bolt heads. I'm going to take these out and soak them overnight in white wine vinegar, but there are certain ones that it may be hard to get at, or you may just not have time or happen to have access to the Chateau Rothschild, in which case, in the absence of white wine vinegar, this stuff, HCB1, is great. It's a corrosion barrier. You squirt some on the end of a cotton bud, dab it in there and let it work its magic. It's the next best thing. Close up, this paintwork is not so good. Wait till you see the magic that a bit of spit and polish can do. If you've come to this channel for a total nut and bolt strip down and rebuild, then hit that subscribe button, because that's what I'm all about. But the fact is today, it's just not necessary. This bike's in such good nick that it really doesn't need that level of attention. For the final coat, shine and protection, Spray Dot Bike Frame Builders Top Wax. This does the business. This crank's lost some of its sheen close up. Nothing wrong with that, of course, doesn't affect the function of the bike, but if you think I'm putting up with this, you must be mistaking me for some other fool. The secret ingredient is Auto Sol. Same deal with the stem. I'm not going to machine polish it like I have done with some of my builds, but just a lick of Auto Sol to take off some of this surface oxidation is going to make it look lovely. So the sun sets on another happy build. Does the twilight conceal one or two surface imperfections? Of course it does. But you know my signature style. I like just enough patination to make it clear this is a vintage bike, and vintage bikes are something to be proud of. This one's going to its new owners with the Red Dread guarantee that it is safe, solid, reliable, and most importantly, beautiful. So that's what you get for 25 quid with a bit of know-how. If your tastes extend to something rather more recondite and exotic, then smash that bell, because coming next to this workshop is something rather the opposite end of the scale. Something, in fact, so rare and exotic that it makes all these bikes look like landfill. See you soon.